Welcome to Coaching with Confidence and Care podcast, inspired by common topics that arise in coach training, mentoring, and supervision. I am Dr. Luba Desamidze, the founder of Upthink Coaching. I'm an active coach trainer, mentor, and supervisor. If you are listening, you're probably looking to deepen your skills as a coach. I hope this podcast will be a helpful resource for you and contributes to your journey. Hi everyone! This episode was inspired by a couple of recent conversations I had with coaches. In just 1 week, 2 or 3 coaches told me that they want to work on improving their questions to make them more powerful and more impactful, so I thought it could make a helpful podcast episode. I'll cover 3 areas: what powerful questions are and how they emerge, then practical guidelines for creating them, and a few suggested activities you can experiment with to further develop this competency. The first thing I want to do is really to convince you that powerful questions are not about using special or specific words or structures or themes. So if you hope to find a secret list of powerful questions, relax, it does not exist. Actually, even when we train coaches at Upthink Coaching, we never give them a list of questions, as we believe that questions that truly resonate do not come from a list. Our goal is to develop coaches who can create powerful questions in the moment and, more importantly, cultivate a way of being and a mindset from which those questions naturally emerge. So first, let's align on what we mean by a powerful question. A powerful question is a question that creates something new. It creates clarity, insight, or expanded awareness. It helps your client see something they haven't seen before or think in a different dimension. Basically, if you're asking a question and your client seems to already know the answer, or maybe they answer it without hesitation, that is not a powerful question. It does not generate new insight, and you may get the sense that the client is telling you something they already know. If you are just asking questions that deepen content, like asking the client to elaborate on the story, those questions may not spark immediate insight. But if your questions challenge their frames of mind or disrupt a limiting frame, then new meaning may become possible. And disruption or challenge do not have to look like confrontation. It means being more courageous and address the hard truths that your client may need to see, and you do it with care. If a question feels safe and obvious, it is likely reinforcing some predictable patterns. But powerful questions may push those boundaries of your client's awareness. A good, powerful question, in my view, is the question that clients may not be able to ask themselves, just because sometimes they may not be aware that another perspective is possible, and sometimes it may be quite a sensitive space, like a truth your client is not yet ready to face. And by asking a powerful question, you help that truth to get revealed. Powerful questions are often open-ended. They avoid yes, no, or leading structures, and traditionally powerful questions are short, so that your client spends most time thinking about the answer and not what you wanted to say with your question. Truly impactful questions disrupt habitual thinking. When a client feels stuck, it's often because they are caught in repetitive thought patterns, going in circles in their thinking, and a proper question invites them to step outside that mental box and look at the situation from a different vantage point. Most importantly, in my view and experience, asking truly powerful questions is not a goal, but an outcome. It's the skill that emerges from the development of other competencies. Coaching mindset, which needs to be open, curious, non-judgmental, separating your own experience and the client's experience, emotionally aware, establishing and maintaining trust, relational presence, and active generative listening. Once you work on developing those skills, your questions will naturally improve. So good questions usually come from the space of deep listening, and such questions can create discomfort, or at least sit right at the edge of it. You might hear some shifts in the conversation dynamics. You may sense or hear a pause, some emotions from clients. There may be surprise, confusion, or even slight resistance. Or you can notice any other signals that reflection is happening. Experienced coaches and mentor coaches often say that powerful questions emerge in the moment and they don't come from a question bag. What does that mean exactly? That means that you create the container, the space and relationship that kind of invite impactful questions into existence, which in turn means that you have built and you maintain a good level of trust to allow your client to share some deeper thoughts, become vulnerable not only with you, but with themselves. I believe that truly powerful questions happen at quite vulnerable moments when clients need to face uncertainty, inner conflict, confusion, hard truth, lack of purpose, self-sabotage, and other difficult processes. The coach's skill lies in building enough trust for the client to let you into their world, into their way of thinking, and to lower their guard and to allow those emotions and processes to emerge and face them, because that's not an easy thing to do. Then you also need to listen generatively and perceive the whole picture of the world that your client is communicating, beyond specific words and statements. You need to get deeply attuned to the client in your presence and connection, or how you relate to them. That attunement is not just a cognitive attunement when you follow the story. It's also an emotional attunement. It can be a somatic attunement. For example, a client may say they feel heaviness in their chest, and you notice a similar sensation in yourself. This is an energetic attunement, by which I mean the overall relational dynamics of the session and how the coach and client are present with each other, the relationship between client and coach. And in that container that you are creating, you have no personal agenda. You are driven by what your client is telling you, and then you hear something beyond words, like a gap, contradiction, emotional influence, tension. Then you register it, and it triggers your curiosity and you explore it. So this is how I understand and I observe what happens when a powerful question is asked. If you create these right conditions, then a good question, an impactful question will arise on its own. Another critical factor in what makes a question powerful is timing. A powerful question emerges in the right moment. I know I said that a few times already. What this means is that in those moments, the client is in a curious, open-minded state, and they are ready to reflect and look inward. The same question asked at different times or to different people can produce almost opposite effects. You know, there are some questions that are often considered to be powerful, like questions about values or some deeper meaning or the purpose or the identity level. To be more specific, maybe questions like, what do you really want? Or what motivates you to get up in the morning? Who are you being when you say this? And so on. These questions are quite deep and reflective, and they have good intentions. However, if the timing is not right, they may not have much power. I know personally, as a coaching client, I may get annoyed when a question appears which sounds meaningful, but it does not emerge from what's just happened for me in the session at that moment. And as a mentor coach, when I listen to recordings, I sometimes notice questions that sound a bit random or inserted in the conversation. And I'm like, where does this question come from? And when I explore that with my mentees and I ask them, what inspired that question? Do you remember what triggered that question, where the question came from? And they go like, I didn't know what to ask, or I was waiting for a moment to ask this question because the client addressed some of that earlier, or they give me any other feedback, which may mean that the coach was not fully present. So a question just felt a little bit off. Just because a question sounds polished and touches deeper layers, it doesn't mean that it will land or resonate with everyone and anytime. A strong connection between coach and client is one of the key preconditions for more powerful questions to emerge. I would strongly encourage you to see coaching not as a transactional, strictly result-oriented conversation, but to work on developing relationships with your clients and fostering those relationships, trust and connection, so that clients invite you in and allow you access to their inner world where insights and deeper truths can surface. The points I've covered so far focus on enabling conditions and inner stance that support the emergence of powerful questions. Now let's talk about really some practical and technical, for the lack of a better word, suggestions. One of the key points would be to learn to hold your client's frame of reference as dynamic, not fixed. What does that mean? Clients perceive the world and themselves in particular ways, and sometimes those perspectives are no longer serving them, so they're getting stuck, and they bring those situations to the sessions with you. I guess quite often you might see them getting stuck because they may hold assumptions about what is true, as if these assumptions were fixed laws about how the world works, even though reality is often more nuanced. This is what we mean by a fixed frame of reference. For example, if a client says something like, "In order to do well in life and be successful, I need to work 24/7 and I need to limit my social interactions and sacrifice my family life because I can't have it all." So this is an assumption. If your client believes that's the only truth, it means that their frame of reference is fixed, and all the decisions that they make, all the situations that they face, all the questions that they have, they view them from this fixed perspective on how the world works. And that perspective may be true, or sometimes it may be partially truth, or sometimes it may be completely false. Of course, as coaches, our idea is not to bust myths for our clients, but it is our task to hear those assumptions, recognize them, and explore them, or sometimes even challenge them if that serves our client's development. Powerful questions may arise when you notice how a client defines their problem, and then you ask a question that may intentionally explore their perspective on that, so that the client may see how definitions constrained their options. And some examples of questions that you could ask with this intention could be, for example, what becomes possible if the way you define the situation is not the only one? Or what if this assumption was negotiable? Another important skill is the ability to perceive what's not being said. Active listening, active presence, relational presence, active sensing. Listening, not only what's present beyond the words, but also listening or for something that's missing, that's absent, that's been avoided. I do have a nice podcast episode on global listening, on zooming in and zooming out while you listen. That is episode number 6. And I invite you to revisit that episode and see if it can offer more learning to you. Cultivating that skill may also help you develop this ability to perceive what's not being said. Maybe some contradictions appear in your client's story, or some tension, or some slips. Maybe you notice a pattern, maybe an emotional or an energetic shift. And when I say an energy shift, it is about a change in the relational field and the client's internal state, which becomes observable through emotional, cognitive, somatic, or interpersonal markers. So rather than energy in a metaphysical sense, we are talking about alterations in emotional regulation, attention, or relational engagement. Anything that isn't being said is still part of the story. It's just nonverbal, and so it may be invisible or unrecognized part of the story for your client. By revealing that part or exploring that part, making it visible, you can add more power to your questions. Alongside this, I would encourage you to practice micro-pattern recognition. Noticing subtle shifts in tone, pace, posture, or energy in your client, so your questions do not stay at the surface level, but you kind of address or help your client notice their internal structure experience and see if that contributes to insight or awareness. You can address something that hasn't been said with questions like, what feels important to name right now? Or what feels hardest to name right now? What are you walking around but not naming? Again, these are just examples, and what will make them powerful is not this specific way of phrasing them, but the right timing. You can address the other person's body language and ask questions like, what happens in you as you say that out loud? Pay attention to your own bodily signals. If you notice strong resonance, or you notice something is shifting for you, like your shoulders suddenly feel heavy, or like your head feels so full of ideas you cannot concentrate, or maybe you feel super clear and grounded all of a sudden. Observing your client's somatic signals as well as being attuned to your own somatic signals can help you identify those best moments to ask powerful questions related to somatic awareness that may resonate with your client. Questions like, what happens in you as you say out loud? Or where do you notice that decision in your body right now? Another skill to add here is to practice systemic reframing. As you explore your client's way of thinking, it's often eye-opening for them to see their story as a system or a frame, not as a linear narrative. A linear narrative tends to be overly simplistic, a straightforward cause then effect way of making sense of things. But we know that just because one event happened prior to the other, it doesn't automatically make it the reason or the trigger for the other. Non-linear thinking and more kind of systemic thinking helps people to take a look at the whole picture, to examine the whole picture, see a relationship between different elements, interdependencies, interrelationships, and thus be more informed and see what other forces, internal or external, are influencing the situation. Powerful questions often come from helping clients see a relationship between different elements of a situation, not just isolated details. So questions like, what role are you playing in this pattern? Or if you want to challenge a frame, you could ask something like, what if this problem was actually a signal? What assumption is holding this frame in place? Or if the situation was teaching you something, what would it want you to learn? Now, if you're already doing most of this and you want to keep growing, then an interesting experience may be shadowing your own question formulation patterns. Do you know how you create questions? Do you know how you decide what questions to ask? That's always an insightful direction, and we explore that in mentor coaching and supervision. In mentor coaching, we have session material right in front of us that we can reflect on, and then we think, okay, what drove this question? What were you thinking about, or what specifically triggered you in what the client said and drove your mind into a certain direction to ask this question? What was that? Many coaches are surprised about how much they can discover about themselves, their style and their preferences, filters, lenses, if you just pay attention to how you ask questions and what your questions are about. Try this if you practice in triads with peer coaches. You may also find it interesting to experiment with coaching pairs or triads, where one coach asks questions and the other reflects not only on content, but they also share with you the effect of each question on them, their emotional state or their cognition. This will allow you to calibrate And this would be a luxury to receive such rich feedback. What is happening behind the scenes? What is happening in them as you ask this question? As we wrap up, I want to pause here and let these ideas land. Powerful questions are not something you collect. They grow out of how you listen, how you relate, and how willing you are to stay with uncertainty alongside your client. Continue to deepen awareness of your inner dialogue when your client speaks, so that questions arise out of genuine curiosity, a very clean state, and not your assumptions or predictions or hypotheses or fears or concerns. It's not about you asking a question that sounds clever, okay? It's not about you performing, in front of the client, but it's about asking a question that aligns with your client's inner process at that moment and complements it. Develop tolerance for ambiguity and complexity. Powerful questions all touch very vulnerable and uncertain places. Of course, work on your own self as tool. Practice psychological containment and your skills to foster a safe space. Powerful questions can activate strong emotions in your clients, and you need to be prepared to hold that safe space when your clients are most vulnerable. And, sometimes it's just best to walk away. Recognize when not to ask a question. Just because you can ask powerful questions like a pro does not mean that you need to overuse them. There are many alternative ways to create awareness. In the next episode, we'll shift gears slightly and talk about laser coaching. That is how to work effectively in short, focused conversations. This would be especially relevant for leaders who use a coaching approach in day-to-day interactions and do not always have the luxury of long sessions, but still want depth and impact, and they still want to have one-on-one time with their people. A quick reminder that new podcast episodes come out every 2 weeks and alternate with our YouTube interview series, Conversations with Coaches, where I speak with practitioners across different niches about how they actually work and run their coaching practice. If you are interested in developing your coaching beyond tools and techniques into relational depth, reflective capacity, and psychologically informed work, our ICF accredited programs open again in spring 2026 and fall 2026. You can explore all the details in your own time at upthinkcoaching.com. upthinkcoachingaltogether.com. You're also welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always open to thoughtful professional conversations, and I work one-to-one through mentor coaching and supervision for coaches who want a more reflective space to think about their work. That's all for today. Thank you for listening, and I will be with you again in the next episode.